And I can comfortably say, from where I sit, that all those indicators somehow still put Ghana right on the map. Because there is a belief, and a tacit belief, that if any country will make it in Africa, Ghana should be the spearhead. And not because we don't have problems now, but because of the resilience and the robustness that we've seen historically. And so that in itself is very important for us to recognize. The recent situations in which we find ourselves, I can almost confidently say, is a result of a double, what I call a double whammy, or a perfect storm. First we had the pandemic, and just when the world thought we were recovering from the pandemic, then other global political events like the war between Russia and Ukraine once again had a deleterious impact on the path of many countries, with supply chains disrupted, value chains totally disrupted. And what that has done has been to push the world into a very, very difficult phase where we are seeing growth depressed again, right into the medium term. So it's important that we look within ourselves to see how we can survive this, because we can survive, and I believe we will survive. And the indications from many investors that I speak to is that the confidence in Ghana is still pretty high. And in fact, higher now than ever, and that has put us in what they call a depeche mode. We are in a hurry, we are speed, because we are being pulled in all directions to speak to investors from almost all corners of the world, because they identify Ghana first as a beachhead, like I said, for the AFCFTA, but also a country that has shown that things can work. And there are problems almost everywhere. In view of that, between the Ministry of Finance, GIPC, and many of the agencies, and of course, in partnership with the IMF, and I'm sure the Minister will speak a lot more about that, they generated what we call the PCPEG, the Post-COVID Program for Economic Growth, which highlights once again the import of the private sector and how government can help private sector accelerate growth and overcome some of the challenges we have in the market, recognizing that the ability for us as a country and the government to rake up revenues is a bit compromised because of those two events that I mentioned before, and also the fact that we do not want to go borrow. And we recognize that earlier on in the currency of this government, the indication was that the economy must grow on production and productivity. And that still stands without equivocation. It still stands. In addition to the PCPEG, is also the Ghana Mutual Prosperity Program, which again emphasizes the import and the impact that private sector can have in the economic growth. And it's very clear that it's a private sector that creates jobs. It's a private sector that creates opportunities. And it's investment that fuels the private sector to create business opportunities. There are quite a number of other policy initiatives that are there to support the private sector. The Ghana Enterprise Authority in itself is also repositioned. The National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Project is also there to help startups and create incubation for new companies that come into the economy. And for us, that is also key, because it's those new companies, it's those that are surviving now, that will grow to be the blue chip companies in Ghana. To also facilitate that, at the GIPC, we have proceeded quite rapidly to table before Cabinet and then to Parliament reforms in the investment law. The import of that is to remove as many bottlenecks for business. And when I say business, it's not just for foreign direct investment, but for businesses in Ghana to invest. So we are removing as many bottlenecks as we can to make it easier for businesses in Ghana, being local, indigenous, and foreign, to be able to invest and grow the economy. And that, of course, requires that we debate. And we've had close to about 23 stakeholder engagements to get to where we are. We've even met the Parliamentary Subcommittee on Trade, Industry, and Tourism to discuss this way forward. And there is clearly the reason to perhaps also build up a new investment law or an investment code that will affect all sectors into one track and put them all in one track. And we are very pleased that today we have a select group of companies, the Ghana Club 100 members, over here to engage. And like I said, it's about partnerships, private-public partnerships for economic growth. And we are very happy to play this role to facilitate the partnership for the economic growth. So thank you very much for coming. And I hope we have a very passionate but measured discourse to ensure that we get the best out of it for mutual benefit. Thank you very much for coming, and we hope that many of you will again be present at the 20th year Ghana Club 100. I am sure this year we are going to see some surprises as we did last year. I also want to make the point that in the course of this breakfast, we'll have our advisor come and give a brief explanation of what the rankings and the ratings comprise of. Because sometimes we've had people complain, no, we think we should have been the first 5. And I tell them that I never know who is in the 100 till the day of the event. So we completely wash our hands off and give it to the expert who does the rankings. And I'm sure it will give you comfort when you hear what they have to say. So thank you very much for coming. And I hope you've had enough breakfast to keep you till when we close around midday. Thank you.
Who is the Director General for SIGA, State Interest Governance Authority. Let's welcome him for some brief remarks, please.
Good morning. Actually, I didn't know I was going to speak. Yofi invited me for breakfast and said to me that there's no free breakfast, so I have to say a few words. So first, I'd like to the Minister of Finance and the CEO of GIPC and his lieutenant, thank you very much for giving SIGA the opportunity to address such an august gathering. I think at SIGA, what we seek to do is to bring the private sector and public sector together. We've termed it the economic superhighway, because just like we build roads and everybody has the opportunity to ride on it, we believe that if we can let our public entities work, then it can create the enabling environment for our private sector to thrive and grow faster, and sometimes with less investments. That's what we are seeking to do. And I think the president in his wisdom realized that the old SEC, State Enterprises Commission, even though it had all the good, had the intent, was not working, and that's why in 2019, June 2019, he passed the SIGA Act. The SIGA Act basically holds all the state interests. That's what we have. Any entity that has state interest, we are responsible for oversighting it. And our job in terms of oversighting is to make sure that these entities do work. And unfortunately, over the years, there hasn't been much compliance, and that's what we're working hard to do now, to make sure that there's accountability. And we believe that if there is proper accountability, these entities would grow. And in the past, through no fault of theirs, a lot of these entities have been managed with what we also call the kiosk mentality. People go into these entities and they manage them as their own little operations. So you have million CD entities that until the SIGA Act was passed, most of them had never done or presented proper audited accounts or management accounts. And in fact, sometimes it's mind-boggling when you go into these entities. However, in the last 3 years, and I've always, when I've had the chance to talk to His Excellency the President, I said for me, being able to transform these public entities will be one of his lasting legacies. Because once these entities start to work, we'll begin to see the dividends. And last Thursday, for me, one was manifested when we went to Ada. Songo has been sitting for almost the last 50 years. You know, people go in or business people go in, but it doesn't work. So through the collaboration of His Excellency the President, SIGA, and the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources and others, this entity has been turned over to a private entity, and arguably now the biggest salt mine in Africa, not only West Africa, but Africa. And I believe that the downstream effect of something like Songo working would be changing the whole face of the community in Ada, because out of that will spring other industries. And that's what we're hoping to do. And recently, Cabinet has passed that 17 entities should also be given out to individuals who have the capacity and the capability to turn some of these things around so that things will begin to work. And that is what we are doing, and that's why we also collaborate with GIPC to see where we can bring foreign capital to help turn some of these entities around, not through government, but working with entrepreneurs and successful business people like you, and that's what we are doing. But our main focus now is to make sure that these entities work, because the entities can only help the private sector if they themselves are on the right footing. And that's why we are exciting to make sure that their books are in order, governance is at an all-high, boards work, and people know exactly why they've been put in these positions. And once it starts working, we begin to see the private sector moving very fast in this country. And that's what we are hoping to do. So since I was invited here for breakfast, I don't want to make my remarks too long, but our doors are open. If you have ideas, we're happy to work with you. I mean, some of our entities have really done well in the last 3 years, and I believe that the downstreaming of their businesses will also go to the private sector, and we'll see a lot of movement in that space. An example is ECG. Another example is BOST. I mean, BOST, for instance, actually is now called BEST, not BOST anymore. So bulk energy instead of bulk oil. I think once these entities start downstreaming to the private sector, we'll begin to see the impact. And there are a few of them, and we are working hard to change the narrative. Because when the narrative of the public sector entities change, it basically trickles down to the private sector, which trickles down to increasing government revenues and others. And that's what we are working hard. So our doors are open. If you have any great ideas or you want to partner with any of the state entities, I'm always a phone call away. My investment and divestiture manager is here. Joshua, if you are one, please stand up. We're always looking for partners. He's here. Yeah, he's responsible for investments. So if you want to partner with any state entities, if you go to them and they are not minding you, come to us. We'll hold your hand and take you there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's a good time for us to acknowledge a few guests. We know we have in our midst various CEOs from Club 100 companies, but I would like to mention a few VIPs we invited. We want to acknowledge the presence of Engineer Kwejo Ayensu Obin, Deputy Managing Director, Engineering and Operations, ECG. We also want to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Yamwa, Director at the Ministry of Energy. We want to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Alexander Harvey Ewusi, Chief Revenue Officer, Ghana Revenue Authority. Thank you. We want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Philip Abrebu Otu, the Head of Research, Bank of Ghana. Abrebu Otu, Head of Research, Bank of Ghana. Okay. We want to welcome Mr. Kweku Ajimandia, a board member, Ghana Investment Promotion Center. You're welcome, sir. I have the honor to welcome Dr. Efua Asabia Asari, Chief Executive Officer, Ghana Free Zone, Ghana Export Promotion Authority. Sorry. I also want to welcome Madam Patience Akolo, Director, Tema Enclave, Ghana Free Zones Authority. And we've already heard from the Director General for SIGA, Ambassador Edward Boateng. Keynote speaker is a man who needs no introduction. His profile is about 20 pages long. So in order that I don't get into any trouble by abridging it or adding onto it, I have the honor to welcome Honorable Ken Oforiatta to give us the keynote address. Let's warmly welcome him to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed. And good morning to you all. It's good to be here. Yeah, the introduction would have been very long if we were to even look at what one has done with the debt restructuring alone. Would take us all day. But it's really good to be here. Took some time off for medical review. Everything went well, so got back on Saturday, and this is the first major assignment that Mr. Grant has given me. But it's really good to see you all. The challenge really for us is how do we move from a government dominant environment into truly a private sector driven environment, because government in essence can go but so far. I recall in 2017 we sort of cancelled some 17 taxes, and we were very clear philosophically as a center-right government about moving from taxation to production. Now the challenge is that transition, as you also then and try to ensure that you have a country that has social mobility, and therefore your investments in education, healthcare, etc., which in the end is the most sustainable resource that you have. So that transition period becomes really tricky. As you mentioned, we still were able to generate quite substantial growth from 2017 through 2019 through COVID. And when you are also going against the tide of how much taxes you have, you get into these very difficult dilemmas of, well, should that kid go to school? Should that kid be fed? Where do you get the taxes from? And is it the inefficiencies of the system of GRA, or is it really we as corporate and also as citizens who are also not paying our fair share of what has to go on? So these are difficult things. Then, of course, we had COVID with all of the things that we have seen. And truly, sometimes when I speak to my upper middle class friends and they are complaining, I'm like, well, you more than anybody knows what's happening in London or New York or Washington. So how come you are able to somehow ring fence the difficulties there and then assume that everything here will be rosy? Like, there's a bit of a disconnect there. But be that as it may, the question becomes that this issue is at hand, and how do you find a way to resolve it? With as a really subliminal and true understanding that in the long run, it has to be the private sector, even as government does what it has to do. It's, let me read the speech before I'm thrown out of the office when I get there. So it is a pleasure truly and an honor to speak to you all, distinguished stakeholders from the private sector and other government institutions. And I want to use today to discuss not only the challenges our country faces, but also to highlight our determination to work alongside the various stakeholders gathered in this room to ensure that the path to economic recovery is better set and confidence in our economy is gradually restored. As I made clear in the mid-year budget statement, which caused quite a bit of ruckus, that we had turned the corner, and that created certain jitters from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But truly, we have to acknowledge that some very difficult circumstances we had gone through from July of last year when we went to the fund through where we are today, where inflation surged to 50-something%, and also, as we know, the currency was in a free fall state, getting as high as a 50% depreciation, ended the year at 30%, and then this year, relative stability. I think January was about 20, but between February to now, about 1.8 to 2%, so a sense of stability. And then we have to also somehow harness and restrain inflation, which is where the central bank comes in. And then you begin to see some sort of supposed policy disconnect, because we in government want to pay as low rates as possible, and they also fighting inflation and need to mop up, and therefore, but all of that is part of transitions that we will work out. So we are expecting then with growth to average, in a sense, in this critical period, the IMF period, of about close to 4% over that period. And that really is a conundrum. You get into an austerity program, which then says macro stability, debt restructuring, and some structural benchmark changes that you have to. But then that does not give you growth, and that's why this is important. How do you then have a program, a partnership, as Mr. Grant mentioned, with the private sector, so that the growth elements are focused on, and that partnership then is what would take us through that. But with regards to the fund, I think we have done well, and we continue to do. We're going to have our first review after the approval in November. So we are working, as we say in Ghana, assiduously to make sure that we are able to meet that, and I believe that we will. There are a lot of conditions to be met, but that's what we are here for. What you call performance indicators. So the quantitative performance indicators, about 6 of them, indicative targets, about 3, and then some structural benchmarks. But I think with all of that, we've got a long way to be ready for the mission that comes at the end of September, so that we can try and get a staff level agreement while the mission is here, and then go to the board in November for the release of the second tranche, which will be $600 million. In addition to that, certain things we also need to do with the World Bank, so that we can get our DPO, which will be another $300 million. So I believe that we are on course to maybe get $1 billion by year end to support the Bank of Ghana's balance of payments issues. So yes, the issues of macro stability and therefore the fiscal policy, what are we doing with expenditures, what are we doing with revenues, and that we are on. So GRA, of course, is central to all of that. And then the debt restructuring, very difficult process, but we had to have skin in the game to be able to prove to our creditors that we ourselves are also prepared to burden share. Difficulty, but if we want to, as they say, cross the Jordan with the whole community, some sacrifices and difficulties have to be experienced, and then we move on. We've since then, when we did the individual domestic debt exchange program, have then moved on and concluded last week with really the balance of the debt exchange program, where we did a program with the cocoa bills, and I think we had some 91% participation, 97% participation or so of the 7.7 billion. We also had about $740 million of US denominated bonds, and also we got about 92% participation, and then finally we're able to strike a deal with the pension funds of their 29.6 billion and got 95% raise. So I believe now we have a certain sense of control as to what we pay in coupons, and therefore give us some fiscal space to be able to do other things. So then we are left with concluding our discussions with the Paris Club to get to a memorandum of understanding for these bilateral facilities, and also with the Eurobonds. So those are in discussions. I believe that we will make good headway with that. We really expect that we should be able to conclude both this year. It's going to be a lot of discussions, both of the Paris Club to fit the common framework, and also with the Eurobonds investors. So we expect this year to go through IMF first review successfully, the World Bank's DPO negotiations, also conclude with the Paris Club and the Eurobonds, and those are tricky to maneuver. But I think we have proven as a country that we are moving in the right direction. We ourselves are prepared to make some difficult decisions, and really I'm extremely hopeful and excited about that. But the missing link then will be our engagement with the private sector. That really is key as a sustainable means, even as government continues to ensure that all of our citizens benefit from economic freedom and social mobility, which are key for us to move forward. As Mr. Grant mentioned, he's done a lot of work with regards to the outcry about our investment environment, and exactly what it is that Ghana has to do to make investors comfortable, both domestic and foreign. I know there are major issues with regards to local content and exactly how you manage that. And I think those are some of the challenges that we'll have to resolve, and then I believe we should look to resolve those this year, one way or the other. Then we look at GRA and with regards to taxes. And truly, if you look at their productivity the past 4 or 5 years is almost a 30–40% increase from year to year. But it still puts us at about 13, 14, 15% of tax to GDP ratio, which is woefully inadequate. Because our member countries in the region, including VAT, are in the 18 to 20% range, and of course the OECD countries are at about 32. So even when you say GRA has done about 75 billion last year, and that really is 13% or so, you realize that another 75 billion could be had at 26%. And so what is wrong, between the culture of GRA, the performance that they then have, and really, to be honest about what we ourselves as corporates and individuals do or do not do. So for example, we did a pilot last year in which, one of the retail, actually two of the retail stores or companies was reporting something like 350,000 CDs of sales a month. Okay? And therefore, VAT will be what? Maybe 50,000 or something CDs. After putting in the new system for a number of those retail companies, you are moving from 350,000 CDs to an average of maybe 3,000% of 31 million CDs being paid. Okay, so yes, GRA can be, you can say they are harassing you, but when you also see the evidence of what is also happening, then you ask, let's not be just self-righteous. Let us be honest about the situation that we are in, and how do we collaborate to make sure that the country give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and you also live in an environment in which there's equanimity and a sense of fairness in the way forward. So I think that transition is really the difficult one, and I'm sure that GRA will over-audit and to do all sorts of things, but there has to be also your own internal moral compass within the various associations as to whether we are also doing the right thing for the nation in which we are in. Because the truth of the matter is that when I look at West Africa, or we all look at West Africa, Ghana still remains that green space, and recently with all of these coups in this area, we have to protect this environment. And it's an environment that we know that we are committed to making it a thriving and prosperous place for all people. And for that to happen, I think citizens have to always be given the opportunity to make sure that they are educated, there's healthcare, everything else. So we have all of us to really get into a partnership that we decide on a direction where it's a give and take, and we know that we are all important, and nobody should be thinking of short term. So we have, as they say, studied the past in light of our present for the purposes of creating a better future. And this is Adam Smith speaking even in those days. So how do we get honest about that? And really that's for me the true challenge as we work our 18, 20-hour days to make sure we stability, which will enable you to thrive. Then the question was the ecosystem to make sure that you will thrive. So Yofi mentioned again that in October, I hope to launch what we call the Mutual Prosperity Dialogue with all of you to begin to really say, okay, do we need maybe a 5-year period in which we are clear on the tax regime to make sure we inbound the 10 billion or 15 billion that Mr. Grant will want us to target so that we have the inflow to be able to support the major changes that are needed for us to create this robust economy. And I'm confident that as people look around the region, we come back with understanding a country that is optimistic, that there's opportunity, and that there's openness. That the openness and the partnership is what we seek. We can continue tinkering, making sure the macro stability, but we also then have to build a certain values construct with business so that we all know that we move in a certain direction. I think in New York at one point, when New York was literally getting bankrupt, is a business society that sat together to construct a plan to get out of it, because they all knew that New York was a place to continue to be. And I think this country proves in more ways than one. There is one that has a sociology to work with people, and these challenges, I think, amplify the need for us to work with you in partnership to go forward, so that our various institutions, UGRA, government, taxes, etc., are all aligned in a way in which we can all benefit and build a stronger society. So I would really just like to conclude by saying that, let's move towards this mutual prosperity dialogue. Let us work together and speak one language. And I can't leave without giving you a quotation, so let me do that. So Genesis 11:6, that there's nothing we set out to do that we cannot do if we speak one language, and I'm confident that we will. Also, if we, nobody ever reads the second stanza of our national anthem, but there's a sentence in there that says, and I quote, "Our solemn vow must be to use our gifts of mind and strength of arm, whether night or day, in mist or storm, in every need, whatever the call may be, to serve Ghana now and forever." So I give you my commitment that we are going to work really hard to change this dynamic, or this tension into one of partnership and environment in which we'll be able to attract or inbound more private capital, and we will be key champions at the Ministry of Finance, because we see the total landscape. We know how far we can go. We also know that there are periods in which tax breaks help companies to be more robust to go forward. But companies should also have the ethic and values of truly also wanting to pay their fair share of how to grow this country, which is, Yofi calls it the 3 O's, a country of optimism, a country of opportunity, and a country of openness. So I look forward to this. We've already had some, the budget, of course, is coming in November, and I think last week we already met with a whole number of you, beginning to really understand the challenges and what we should do in the budget to progress your growth. So thank you for this opportunity and platform, and I'm really looking forward to see you some more. But let's be confident that we will go through the first review successfully, be able to get the inbound proceeds that we are looking for, and continue to drive macro stability with that fervor and confidence that things will happen well. Thanks.
Let's give him a round of applause again. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. So like he said, 3 O's: openness, opportunity, and optimism. That's what we use as our driver at the GIPC. I also want to take this chance to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Yao Amwatine-Friye, Deputy CEO, Ghana Investment Promotion Center. We want to move on to the next speaker, Mr. Yao Apia Latte Esquire. Yao Apia Latte is a partner and the Delight Africa Head of Infrastructure, Capital Projects, and Economic Advisory. He has over 15 years Big Four accounting firm experience working on corporate finance, M&A transactions, financial advisory, due diligence review, financial modeling, investment appraisal, and deal structuring. Yao has also been involved in public-private partnership and private sector participation infrastructure projects valued at over $10 billion US. He has consulted for international clients and donor organizations across several African countries, including Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, Kenya, Zambia, Botswana, Eswatini, and South Africa. Yao is a regular panelist on local and international business and economic discussions. He has published over 15 articles on the Ghanaian economy and has been quoted by local and international media. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana, and a fellow of Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, UK. Yao is also a member and a lawyer and a member of the Ghana Bar Association. He holds a master's degree in finance from the University of Cambridge, UK. Let's warmly welcome Mr. Yao Apia Latte Esquire.
Thank you. When I sent this, I thought you were going to read something very short. So I'll stand on previous protocols and say a warm welcome to everybody. I've got a very short presentation, so if that comes on board. Okay. So thank you very much. So the minister has given a very good context for us. So the purpose of this discussion is to look at how we can drive economic growth with private sector participation through efficient tax administration. And some of the complaints that we've received from the private sector in particular has been around tax administration, how efficient it's been over the last few years. But obviously, for us as consultants, we advise both private and public sector clients. And so we understand what government thinks, what their needs are, and what the challenges are for private sector. So we speak to it objectively. So I'll talk about why we need a private sector, Ghana's situation, taxation in Ghana. We did a survey recently ahead of the mid-year budget review. Some of the comments and thoughts that came from the private sector in particular, we will share with government and we'll share with everybody here. And then looking ahead, what's the way forward? And I'll read a very interesting quote by a very good friend, a senior lawyer. So 2023 is Africa Union's year for acceleration of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area implementation. A coup happens in Niger, the country which launched the AFCFTA in July 2019. Many West African countries have now closed the very borders across which we are expected to accelerate this trade. So, is Africa rising or we are retrogressing? We are rising. I like the confidence. So, where we launched the AFCFTA, there's a coup there, and we can't even travel there, but we are supposed to accelerate and implement it. So we go on. So why do we need a private sector? I think that point cannot be overemphasized. So you can see the pendulum is heavily tilted towards the left-hand side because we've got needs that cannot be satisfied by government. Government cannot satisfy all our needs. And so at any point in time, it's heavier on the left-hand side. What are the resources available to government? They are the taxes, the levies, and the natural resources. And for us in Ghana, the three main commodities, gold, cocoa, and hydrocarbons, that's oil and gas. But these are not enough to satisfy our needs. So we need a private sector. So when the private sector comes, obviously, so government, if you look at what government source of revenues are, if you read any budget at all, it just cuts across these 5 areas. So private lenders, commercial banks, Euro bonds, and all the other lending that government contracts, donor agencies, grants. We've got foreign lenders, development finance institutions, the World Bank. Obviously, we are going through an IMF program now. Then we've got the central government transfers for local authorities. And then the revenue from tariffs, levies, and taxes, VAT, etc. So these are the source of revenue. But then the tall list of the things that we need, and especially all of us. Okay, so it's a tall list. So we need the private sector to come in. Now, when the private sector comes, what are some of the things that they do? I mean, there's accountability. And for all of us in here, we've got finance function. So there is some level of accountability, same as government, through our governance structure, parliament and the rest of them, public accounts committee, there's some level of accountability. But obviously stronger on the private sector side. There's risk transfer. And if you're a private sector participant, please be prepared to share in the risk with government. So if you deliver any public good, you should be prepared to take some risk. If you go into a partnership with government and develop a public good, like a road, construct, let's say a bridge or a toll bridge or something like that, if you price as recovering your cost within the shortest period of time, that project will not be viable because people will stop using it. I've seen instances where we have developed a new road, the Nairobi-Mombasa Highway, developed through a PPP. And the drivers or the commuters started using a rough road which goes through the bush. And guess what the government did? The government decided to tow the rough road and leave the new developed road for free. And they started using a road that was free. Because if the price that you are charging or participating in government projects is too high, people will stop using it. So prepare to share in the risk with government. And then focus on outcomes. Obviously, when the private sector comes in, we focus on outcome. We budget planning, and there's some certainty there. And then upfront investment planning. So we have instances where in Ghana, we have the National Development Planning Commission. They've got a plan, a 40-year development plan. So how is our yearly budgetary programs fixed or aligned with the Development Planning Commission objectives and plans? So at any point in time, whatever we are introducing, we should ensure that it's aligned with the National Development Planning Commission plans. Otherwise, we put the cart before the horse. So whatever we are planning to do this year, it should be aligned with the 40-year development plan. Then we are growing. Then Africa is rising and Ghana is also rising. If we have a life cycle approach and the innovation, obviously we have artificial intelligence and other innovative means of running businesses. When we partner with government, some of these things will be seen and we see a lot of efficiency because innovation brings some level of efficiency. And the last one I would say is on time and on budget delivery. So the instances where there are cost overruns that we cannot explain, when you bring in the private sector, we are able to budget for on-time delivery and on-cost delivery. So you avoid cost overruns, which obviously increase our debt burden. So Ghana's situation. So the minister said, and I agree, that Ghana is the green space. If you look at our environment, all the air that is blowing around us, Ghana continues to be the green space. Why? Because obviously we have a relatively stable economy. We've got access to large domestic and regional markets. You can access Ghana by land, by sea, and by air. You've got a strategic location and location in time as well. because GMT time is almost like in the middle. When you work with people in Australia, you work with people in Indonesia, those who are 5 hours ahead or 7 hours behind, you can see how inconvenient it is for them. Sometimes they are working with you and they are up at 2 a.m. But for us, it aligns with a lot of our development partners. So strategic location, abundant natural resources, that point cannot be overemphasized. Skilled and cost-effective workforce. I go out there in Southern Africa and some of the regions in Africa and they say that, look, Ghana have got some of the intelligent resources you have across. And if you look at the world scene, I mean, what Kofi Annan and others have done and others are doing, you know that you've got some of the intelligent resources. So skilled, experienced, and qualified labor available in Ghana. And business-friendly reforms, and they are still ongoing. We have automated and digitized a lot of our business activities. We will speak to how these are performing and how these are viewed by the business community. So there's this report we call the Heritage Index of Economic Freedom. It's individual rights. That's the fundamental right to labor and to possess your own assets and use your own assets for the purposes that you intend to use them for. You are allowed, or the environment creates for you to use that. So you work, you make money, and when you make the money, you invest. That investment is protected. If you invest in an asset, that asset is protected. You can perfect that asset. So if you measure it, Ghana is above the regional average. That's Sub-Saharan Africa. So we are above it, but the world average, we are below that. And you look about 3 or 4 of those index in detail. But Ghana is above the Sub-Saharan average. So obviously, still the green space, Sub-Saharan Africa, we are not doing bad at all. But the world average, we are way below that. So the first one is that overall, rule of law is relatively well respected in Ghana. The country's property rights score is below the world's average. So obviously, the challenges that we have with perfection and registration of land title is still a problem. And that's something we should address. We should complete the digitalization of the land registration system. It's very important for us to stay above the average, the world average. Then we've got the judicial effectiveness score, which is above the world average. Very important, and that we are not doing bad at all. And government integrity score is also above the world average. So you have a lot of reports that are available. When you go to the Ministry of Finance website, you have a lot of reports that are available. Elsewhere, there are no such reports. So regardless of how you see things, there's some level of transparency in our governance system and something that's recognized worldwide. So you can see all of these benchmarks as seen there, the Heritage Index score. We are not doing bad at all. So we go on. Now, taxes. The top individual corporate and corporate tax rates are 30% and 25% respectively. So for individuals PAYE, the highest you pay is 30%. And for corporate taxes, it's 25%. And I will say this 25% is the starting rate. Because for some corporate institutions, obviously the effective rate is about 35%. And for financial institutions, whether you are listed or not, it's 35 to 37%. Because you are paying over the 25% financial sector recovery levy, COVID levy, you are paying all the other levies. Some of these levies were introduced with sunset clauses that they will end at a particular year, and the sun has never set on them. So, where we introduce levies with sunset clauses, they should end when the sun sets. Otherwise, we continue to have some of these challenges. But you look at it, on average, Ghana's corporate income tax rate is below what other countries are. Some are 30%. But obviously, for some institutions, the rate is over and above the 25%. So that's a challenge and something that we should be mindful of. And obviously, so we go back to the previous slide. So our tax burden is still very high. Government spending is still very high. So effectively, if you combine the two, our fiscal health is so low and it's red. So we are overspending and there's a lot of tax burden on individuals and corporate. So we look at how we balance this. So regulatory reforms. As I said, our regulatory reforms are going well. So you can sit and register. A lot of the things that are done at the company registry or registrar general department is done electronically. But the challenge is they are not information that has been entered electronically. Some of them are scanned and they are sent to you. So you have to move to the point where the information is entered electronically. So elsewhere, you can sit here and register a land in your name. if you can be identified as an individual, so you go to Rwanda, you can register a land in your name. So we still haven't gotten there. So there are still challenges, but we've made a lot of progress. And I think that's something that we should clap for government or Lord government for. So Ghana's economy is one of the more open to foreign investment in sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously, you see all the parameters there. Ghana is significantly above the world average, so trade freedom, investment freedom, financial freedom. That's also very good. So this is a summary of Economic Intelligence Unit assessment of Ghana for the fourth quarter of 2023. So what is likely to happen in 2023? And the impact of these 4 or 5 matrix. So the first one is the corporate tax rate increased significantly, placing burden on business. It's likely to happen. But now that the minister is here, he will tell us that it won't happen. So the Economic Intelligence Unit is saying that is likely to happen. So if the minister is here, well, he says it won't happen. So it's likely to happen. And when it happens, the impact is going to be very high. I've just showed you. If it happens, you are going to be above some of our sub-Saharan African countries that we are currently performing better than. So it has got a high impact. Then political unrest intensifies as 2024 elections approaches. That's something that we have already seen. We are seeing all the political showdowns, right? So it's got a lot of high impacts, and you underestimate it. But let's not underestimate it, because it affects investor confidence. So let's manage our body politics well, in a decorous manner, because some of the voices that we are hearing, they are not very conducive for the investor community. Then we go to sustained inflationary pressure and rapid depreciation of the local currency. It's got a high impact and got a high probability. So our local currency depreciated significantly last year. Obviously, we've seen some stability this year. We expect government to put in the right measures to ensure that we have stability. Otherwise, if it goes way the 15 that others were projecting, it won't help our business environment. So it's got a high impact, and so we should take that seriously. The last one, or last but one, is the Russia-Ukraine war. It's got a moderate impact. These days, we don't talk about Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on. It still has impact, all right, but obviously for a war that has been running for over a year, we should have some mitigation measure around it. Then the last one is Ghana suffers a major terrorist attack, heightening business risk. It has a moderate likelihood, because you've seen all the waves around us, but we are protected. But we shouldn't take that for granted, because it's got a high impact if it happens. So we should take all the measures to protect the country from any terrorist attack, because it also affects investor confidence. Taxation. Yes, let's go up. Please, let's go back. So intensity, so the higher, the more intense. So it's similar to the impact. So if you have a high intense, so we measure over 20. So 16, it's fairly intense, but obviously closer to the 20. Yeah. And 12 is low. So terrorist attack is low. The intensity is low. Okay. So taxation in Ghana. So this is a very good picture. So like we say in Ghana, book no lie. So clearly, what picture do you see here? And how does Ghana compare? So Ghana collects 12 to 13% of GDP in taxes, or its taxes as a percentage of GDP is 12 to 13%. So these are our peers. So you are performing significantly below our peers. So we need to collect more taxes. So that means that the GRA people come to your offices more. They will visit you more. Why? So that is not the solution, and I'll tell you why. So that is not the only solution. We should find other means of collecting the tax. So there's a faithful few that are always paying, and they are visiting you. So tell them that, oh, well, you've welcomed them, they have overstayed, they are welcome. Uganda is at 15%. Cote d'Ivoire is at 18%, just next door. Kenya is at 18%. South Africa is at 28%. And Seychelles at 32% of GDP. So it means we have a lot of room to collect taxes. Now, what's the challenge? Why are we not getting there? First, difficulty in accessing tax obligation information. So sometimes you always dispute it. And one of the legislative challenges we have, which has been affirmed recently by the Supreme Court, is the fact that when a tax assessment is done on you, you have to pay 30% of the obligation before you start the process to challenge it. That is a big challenge and a major challenge. Because if the assessment has got some errors in there, you still have to pay 30% before you start the process or you commence the process to challenge. So it's something that we have to be mindful of. Difficulties assessing your tax obligation. So you may not know your tax obligation, but you have some challenges in assessing that obligation. So cash transactions with no trails. So you can't trail the people that you pay, your artisans, your masons, your carpenters. You do the Momo transactions. Sometimes you pay them on cash because these days they want to avoid e-levy. So they want cash transactions. So that's part of the problem. So we are part of the problem. That's why we are below the 18% that are peers. Then in large black economy, obviously, a lot of transactions are done outside the banking system. Tax evasion, deliberate tax evasion, and I'm speaking to the private sector. When you withhold tax, the purpose of withholding tax is the government has appointed you as an agent. When you withhold the tax, pay the taxes. It doesn't belong to you. And I'm speaking to the private sector. When you withhold the taxes, pay the taxes. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to government. When you withhold or you hold VAT, pay the VAT. It doesn't belong to you. Because sometimes when you are fighting the tax audits, you have a challenge where your client has withheld the tax for almost a year or sometimes 2 years and have not paid. The money is not your money. Pay it to government. It's as simple as that. That is why the GRA people will keep coming to you and you have problems, because you are holding money that belongs to government. So let's be fair. It is not always the case that we are putting the blame on government. We also have a lot to do as private sector. Narrow tax base. Obviously, there are only few taxes that we are taxing the same people over and over again. Then corruption on the part of tax officials. This one, they will always say, where's the evidence? We have the evidence. But who? Who should bail the cat? So some tax officials can be corrupt. Lack of transparency and integrity in our tax administration. And obviously, we will speak to that shortly. So can we go on? So for an efficient tax administration, we should have online registration of taxpayers. We've made a lot of progress on this. Online payment of taxes. We've made some progress on this. Online registration of taxpayers' identification number. So we've converted to the Ghana card, which is also now a tax identification number. But all these electronic things that we are doing, they should be speaking to each other. So yes, I've converted my Ghana card to a tax identification number. But how many of us have followed up to find out what these Ghana card holders are doing, how much money they are making to pay the taxes? So we should have all of these linkages speaking to each other and ensuring that people are discharging their tax obligations. So it's a very good we digitize, but we should also follow up and make sure we are optimizing returns on digitalization. Online submission of forms for audit. So you should submit the forms for audit, do it online. Obviously, there's a lot of paperwork involved, but if you're able to do online submission for tax audit, it helps the process. And it also helps those who come in the middle to assess or to assist you fight your claims. And then online filing of returns, and then helplines to assist taxpayers via voice notes. I'll share an example with you of how it works in another country. So in China, it has a state administration of tax undertaking digitalization as part of their Internet plus tax action plan. So that's happening in China. Australia has got Alex. So Alex is a virtual tax assistant which answers questions about general taxation. So when I sell my shares in the company that I incorporated ago, how do I know whether I have a capital gains tax obligation or not? And if I have a capital gains tax obligation, how much do I pay? Ask Alex, and it will answer you. Ask GRA. So if you create some of these things, it makes things very easy. People are able to assess their tax obligations, and they will not avoid it. Because sometimes the danger is people tell you things that are not true. We have 4 tax audit reports, and you realize that some of the comments from the revenue authorities are not true. But because you don't know, they tell you and you pay. So if you access online, you are told what the online is saying. You just said, Alex told me, and I'm paying this. It's as simple as that. And then Brazil has a system for business to e-file their accounting tax record. Yes, and Canada allows for e-invoicing as well. So these are some of the things that our digitalization drive can help us do a lot more. So we did a survey recently, just a few points there. So the first one is that a lot of respondents identified, about 68% identified inflation and currency fluctuation to be the #1 impediment to growth of their industry. So a lot of the industries we interview, inflation and currency fluctuation, these are the two significant high impact on business. And I'm sure a lot of industry captains can attest to this. So it's at the doorstep of government. Let's address this. We ask issues like supply chain delays, geopolitical instability, inflation, skills, etc., etc. You can see that others are low. Cost of capital is also significant. That's the third. Cost of capital is significant, so we also have to address that. And then the last I want to mention will be global economic downturn, obviously for those in commodity-based activities. Then 73% of respondents agreed with government digitalization drive has been useful to businesses. Let's give it up to government. I mean, you all agreed that digitalization drive has been good. So 73% supported government digitalization drive. But the comment there is that further digitalization drive should involve private sector. We want to show you or tell you where you should digitalize and not just digitalize. We want to tell you where you should digitalize more. And I've given you an example or several examples of where we should digitalize more so that it's avoid dispute and people can pay. The tax amnesty thing helped a lot of business and clients because, yes, they know they have a tax obligation, but give them the amnesty. So all these GRA audits and all, we should have a room for some tax amnesty, installment payment over a certain period. People will willingly submit themselves for audit, and they will pay over a certain period. So let's introduce a combination of the tax amnesty where people will willingly submit for audit and will pay over a certain period. Sector growth will be boosted by lowering VAT and increasing private sector participation. So if you lower the VAT, so it was 12.5%, it's gone to 15. Minister is here, it won't get to 17. So businesses are saying, if you lower it, all the better. But at least, worst case scenario, let's stay and not go into 17%. Because, in fact, the challenge we have now is the fact that the levies cannot be claimed. So it's almost like a tax on tax situation. So that's a challenge a lot of private sector players are complaining about, and we should address that. So ideally, we should lower the rate. Otherwise, we should not increase it at all. Most respondents view reduction in corporate income tax rate as the most desired direct tax. So if you want to reduce it to 22.5, it will make a lot of impact. Because one way to grow economy is to reduce the taxes, business creates employment, there's a lot of activity, and then employment are generated. That's one of them. So how do we balance the two? So we want to meet our fiscal targets and pass the test that is coming up. On the other hand, the private sector also needs support to grow. So how do you balance the two? So looking ahead, just a summary. Promote PSP, so we should promote private sector participation. Obviously, we've seen the benefits far outweighs the cost. Improve investment climate. Obviously, GIPC is doing a lot of work, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this as well. Drive the digitalization agenda, efficient tax administration, learn from best practices that we've just shared. I'll end with a quote from Warren Buffett. No matter how great the talent or effort, some things just take time. You can't produce a baby in 1 month just by getting 9 women pregnant. So there are some things that will take time. In as much as we want to balance our fiscal effort and targets, we should also not kill the private sector. It has to take time to get there. If you don't, and you want to truncate the process, you get 9 women pregnant, guess what? You have to wait for 9 months, and you have 9 babies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Pialate, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. We'll move on quickly to the next part of this morning's program. And I'd like to hand over to a moderator who will take us through the remainder of this particular session. His name is Mr. Bernard Avle. He's a host, City FM and City TV. Let's welcome Bernard to take over.
Thank you very much. I think Yao deserves such a resounding round of applause. And Yao, you've done a lot of the work for us. I really, really wish you would keep some of the slides up there. We have a very big theme for the panel: public-private partnerships, bridging the gap for inclusive and sustainable economic development. Very big panel indeed. Let me first acknowledge the guest, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. Thank you so much for your speech. You've Grant, one of our favorite CEOs. All of us here, we are rooting for you to do well. We like your bow tie as well. Thank you for your massive convening power. 2 weeks ago, we were at Kempinski. It was very fun. How many of you were at Kempinski 2 weeks ago when he organized that event? Oh, let me see my hand. Wow, very few. It was a very fiery event. We are hoping for more fire today. Ambassador Boateng, it's good to see you. Always great to have you around. And of course, GEPA, another of our favorite agencies, doing fantastic work. Put your hands together for GEPA with their NTEs. And of course, the OMCs, I forget your name. Ajimanduya, thank you so much for being here as well. So I'm going to invite the panel members. We have Mr. Ernest Apia-Boache, who's the Chief Revenue Officer for GRA Customs Division. Please put your hands together for him. Sir, please take your seat. You are being ushered into the firing squad. So, because your fire will be a lot, we have invited Dominic Nab, who is the Assistant Commissioner for GRA, Domestic Tax Revenue Division, to join you to receive some of the blows. So, Mr. Nab, where are you? He's coming. All right. We also have from the PURC, Alhaji Jabaru Abubakari, joining us. Put your hands together for him, please. And then we've invited from the Bank of Ghana, Philip Abradu Otu, who is absent because of a YFM event they are hosting. So the Bank of Ghana has sent Mr. Kweku Foko to represent him. Is Mr. Foko here? He's on his way. Okay, so we'll start before he comes in. So, yes, so that's Mr. Nab. Thank you very much, Mr. Nab. Put your hands together for Mr. Nab again. All right. So, a lot has been said so far. You want to be together? It's like National Science and Maths quiz. Okay, you move. No, yeah, you know, when they ask the question, they'll be calculating. You know. Yesterday, I was watching the IGP thing in Parliament, and the lawyer sitting by the police guy. When they ask the question, the lawyer will be the one to press the mic for him to talk. So, if the lawyer doesn't press the mic, he's not answering. So, we all need lawyers. I think that your theme is great, but I think we all know what the key question is in the room. I think the big issue is that 13%. That 13% where everybody else is doing 18, average is 25. You know, I'm talking about the tax we are not paying. Minister made reference to it, and Yao has confirmed it. Somebody wanted me to ask Yao, by the way, when you say our tax to GDP is 13, are you talking about tax collected or tax reported? You know, are you talking about tax collected or tax reported? Somebody wanted me to ask you, but the person is not here. So, so I'm just putting that out there. Is it tax? And I was very happy with you gave about 8 reasons. And I think with complex issues, you know, you spoke about issues around uncertainties. You spoke about corruption. So, and I think it would be good for my panel to just give a quick comment on that. What is your observation? Why do you think it's so difficult for Ghana to raise tax to GDP? Ivory Coast is 18%. Seychelles is 30%. The average in Africa is much, much higher than our 13. What is going on? If you can put up that slide, that gave the 8 reasons. Because I think it would be a good way to start the discussion, right? Then we can jump into the PPP issues. You wrote 8 reasons or so. Where did I copy these reasons? Okay, so here they are. Large black economy, cash transactions with no trail, tax evasion, narrow tax base, corruption on the part of both tax officials like you and taxpayers like me. So we are on the same. Lack of transparency and integrity in tax administration. So let me just take general thoughts on that. Is that what are your thoughts on that data set? Why is Ghana not doing well in that area? You can start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I want to take this opportunity to ask as well. Greet my sector minister.
Okay.
And I also extend my greetings to the rest of you, our able audience. To me, one of the reasons that I always look at is as my namesake, Mr. Appiah said, the tax base. We can see that there are a lot of people in the system who are not being taxed or are not paying taxes. So if we can work effectively towards the enlarging the tax base to rope in all these people who are not paying taxes, I think that will make a headway.
So you think it's the base? Mr. Nab, what are your thoughts?
Thank you very much, and good morning to our audience here. The truth of the matter is that we have a very large informal sector. A lot of such persons actually do not pay taxes. They make money, but they don't pay taxes. And yet there are those who are always crying for attention. So I think that we need to work towards that area. The other issue he mentioned has to do with our cash economy. It is very true. Until and unless we are actually able to migrate from cash to cashless or cashless, I'm sure we'll continue to have this problem.
But you know we have now 70 million Ghana cards issued. Your Ghana card is linked to your SNIT. It's supposed to be linked to your tax identification number. There's an integration effort going on, at least in the past 2.5 years. Would you say that that digital integration is yielding any fruits in enhancing tax compliance?
Sure, it has significantly helped. I think thumbs up to government for that initiative. Hitherto, we had a situation where a lot of persons had registered for Ghana card, but they were not in our tax reader. Now, with the fact that if you are an individual, your Ghana card will serve as your tax identification number, we realized the dichotomy. So when we did the reconciliation, we were able to get many more, on our tax reader. So I think that is actually an impressive.
Wonderful. We've just been joined by Mr. Kuku Foko from the Bank of Ghana. Put your hands together for him. Thank you, sir, for being here. PURC, this is my opening question to you. This morning on my radio show, I read an announcement from Ghana Water asking people to download the app so they can pay their water bill. The ECG also announced recently that you can now make direct payments on your app. They don't even accept cash. Are those parts of the overall digitalization effort, and what are your thoughts from PURC perspective on how useful these digital efforts are in enhancing revenue mobilization for these two utilities?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody, including our Honorable Minister and various CEOs here. I think the cashless and digitalization is one of the surest way to be able to eliminate personal interference with regards to resources and operations. And with regards to Ghana Water, I've always made calls to people to even understand how simple their system in terms of payment is. For me personally, I don't know the last time I have visited Ghana Water offices to make payments. If you use the Momo, it's very simple. You get updates with regards to the amount that is outstanding, with regards to how much balance is left for you to pay. The same thing with ECG. Some of the smart payment, smart meters that we have, for instance, I don't know the last time I have walked to. So the convenient part is what, as a regulator, we are trying to ensure, and we've always made sure that any little disturbances that we have with regards to that innovations we keenly monitor that. And anytime there is slight disturbances, as a regulator, we are always on ECG and Ghana Water. And that is the surest way. And the money hit directly the accounts. We've had in the past, for the past 15 years of my regulatory works, where individuals will keep money of institutions for some number of days, and they come back with some stories that, on Thursday my daughter was not well, my son was not well, so I went to the hospital, and we only got discharged on Wednesday. So that means that the period of keeping that institutional money would have lost some sort of earnings on the part of the utility. So for us, first of all, you try to eliminate the human factor, that is one. Two, you are giving readily resources available to the utility to be able to embark on their operations. That makes it very efficient. And I think it's a positive move, which as a regulator, we are always in support of. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I just wanted Mr. Kwekufoko to say hello to us, so we know you are happy to be here, and tell us a bit about what you do at the bank. So that's just by way of introducing yourself.
Okay, thank you, Ben. My name is Kweku Ankumafuku. I am a head of fiscal policy unit with the research department. And so my duty is to give a sense of how government transaction and government activity impact on the central bank's activity in as much as we want to avoid or forestall fiscal dominance. Our duty is to have a sense of what government activity is and how it impinges on the operation of the central bank. So that is my call.
Wonderful. Now, I need to explain my mission here. So the brief I've been given is that I'm doing 2 panels in one. The first topic is understanding the present landscape, considerations for business. That's topic 1. The second topic I've been given is public-private partnerships, bridging the gap for inclusive and sustainable economic development. Maybe they think I should go and do a PhD, so they are giving me these topics by way of pieces, but these are the topics I have been given. So the tax topic is for the 2 of you, and then the PPP topic is for the 2 of you. So when I ask that question, you can decide to look away. Now, the sub-questions they've given me, if I want to ask them, won't finish today. So I want to just ask the questions that a normal business person will ask you. All right? So I will start with something that somebody posted on a tax platform. I'm on a platform called Tax Justice Ghana. So these are in tax. So a gentleman posted something. I'll read it. It says, "Gentlemen, we pay over 22 different taxes and levies to import a vehicle. If you already have a car in Ghana, please hold on tight and maintain it well, even if it's 25-year-old. Then it goes on, clearing an exam quest at Temahabo. This is something posted on Facebook, which found its way onto the platform. So if it's wrong, you correct me, right? Clearing an exam quest at Temahabo. 1, import duty, 68,000. Import VAT, 62,000. ECOWAS levy, 1,650. Vehicle certification, 1 CD. Vehicle examination, 3,199. Network charge, 1,186. Network charge VAT, 155. Network charge COVID health, 11. Processing fee, not mentioned. Ghana Shippers Authority, 9. Import health, national health, import health insurance, 9,904. Network charge national health insurance, 29. Internal revenue tax deposit is the same cow. Internal revenue tax deposit, 3,384 cedis. Ghana city disinfection fee, 390. Import levy, 104. Special import levy, 6,760. Ghana education fund, 9,904. Ghana import and export bank levy, 2,535. MOT, 5 cedis. Network charge get fund levy, 29 cedis. Inspection fee, 261. Africa Union import levy, 3,961. Total, 154,773 to get your car on the road. So this is, he said other things which I can't say here. So, is this correct?
Yes, it could be correct. I just want to take a few minutes to take you through the process of vehicle valuation. When we talk about used vehicle, it doesn't come with an invoice. But we have a system that we go through to be able to get the value and do the assessment for you. For instance, if you are bringing a vehicle from the United States or Canada, we have a software called NADA. Now, when we input the chassis number or the VIN, the vehicle identification number, into the system, it will generate what we call MRSP. That's the minimum reserve price of the vehicle. The minimum reserve price of the vehicle is the price at which the manufacturer was selling the vehicle at the time that he first manufactured it. Now, when we get that value, it is subjected to what we call depreciation. Now, if the vehicle is less than 6 months, and when we take the MRSP value, we don't depreciate, and it is by law. If it is more than 6 months, but not more than 1.5 years, we depreciate it by 15%. We take the 85% as the FOB. When it is more than 1.5 years, but not more than 2.5 years, we depreciate it by 30%. We take the 70%. If it is more than 2.5 years, but not more than 5 years, we depreciate it by 40%. We use the 60%. And if it is more than 5 years, we depreciate it by 50% and use the 50% as the FOB. Now, apart from that, Ghana, by law, we use what we call CIF, that's the cost, insurance and freight. We have standardized rates for saloon cars, station wagons, trucks, and whatever. Now we apply that to add it to the FOB that we have gotten. Then we calculate the insurance. That is 0.875% of the C and F.
Okay.
Then you get your CIF. Now we look at the cubic capacity of the vehicle, and we also look at whether it is a diesel engine or it is a petrol engine. If it is a petrol engine, then unless it is above 3.0, if it is less than 3.0, the import duty is 10% of the CIF. Then if it is more than 3.0, it is 20% of the CIF. Now, if it is diesel and it is more than 2.0, it is 20% of the CIF. All the other taxes that you have mentioned, they are all statutory, which means that
you are just implementing it.
We are implementing.
So of the 22, sorry,
no tax administration can impose a tax or a levy.
So let me just get it straight. I mentioned 22 taxes. You are saying that it's just the first 3 that you calculate. The rest is derived from the equation.
Derived from the system. Because some are 0.5%, equals levy is 0.5%, and all those things, COVID, everything is derived.
So this is not okay. Whilst we are in this alley, is this where you apply the benchmark value? I just want to understand. Is benchmark value related to this?
There's no benchmark value.
It's not related to this at all.
At this time.
Not yet. Not at all.
At all.
It's finished. We don't do it anymore for any. Okay. So just to be clear, the 22 taxes I listed on the imported car are all statutory taxes. How long have we had these 22 taxes?
It's been there for a while.
10 years? 5 years?
You see, taxes and levies, like as my namesake said,
Yeah.
some are for seasonal.
Okay.
But the seasons
They don't
expire,
end.
and it doesn't
The
go
sun
like
never
the,
sets.
The COVID that you are talking about. We are no more in COVID. But the COVID...
The COVID sun hasn't set.
The COVID is not completely gone.
Hey.
It's not completely gone. You see,
and we are implemented. So we cannot say that.
Okay. Yeah, so taxation is governed by law.
Yeah.
And all of us seated here belongs to constituencies.
Yeah.
And we have our parliamentarians who make laws. So for us in GRA, we only administer the laws. And I think that we would not be fair to citizens and to Ghana if we don't actually collect the taxes as we are supposed to collect. So these taxes that you have mentioned, unless we decide as a nation that we don't want to collect them, we will do our work. Thank you.
Who determines the sunset? If Parliament passes a tax and gives it a sunset, do you on your own then say the sun has set? Or Parliament must set the sun?
You see, sometimes the sunset clause, I mean those with sunset clauses, at the end of the period, it has to be assessed. Do we need to take it off or we have to continue? Then Parliament will have to extend it. Is that okay? That is how it is done. For us, we don't have a problem. Once there's a law in place, who administer?
Do you recommend to the minister what they should do? Because you are the guys on the ground.
Oh, I mean, we engage. Are you getting it? We engage. And sometimes we see the need to have it extended.
So sometimes you are the...
No, we are Ghanaians. We are Ghanaians. We are stakeholders. Are you getting it? We want what is best for our country. So whatever we do as Ghanaians to help the citizens.
I'm just trying to understand. So if they propose a tax which you think on the ground will not work, can you tell him that it won't work because of your experience?
We should have reasons. If we think so, yes, why not? I mean, we are Ghanaians as well.
So for example, the e-levy, did they ask you whether it will work? And what did you say?
Oh, the e-levy was something that we all thought, could help our country based on the exigency at the time. Is that okay? And
so you were in agreement with government to impose the e-levy?
Oh, I think so, because we have a very critical situation on our hands.
So were you surprised at the low, the underperformance of the e-levy?
I wouldn't be surprised, because that's our culture. Are you getting it? When the law is put in place, it is to achieve a certain agenda. Then people try to just look around and see how they can actually work against it. But I believe strongly that with education, are you getting it? We'll get there.
So I just ask, is e-levy evasion or avoidance? The e-levy is bad performance.
No, it's evasion. It's evasion.
How do you evade e-levy?
Okay, I will tell you. In the first place, when it comes to the e-levy, they are saying when you are paying, is that okay? Then you would suffer it. So but when you are paying into your wallet, you wouldn't pay that. Now I'm paying money to you, is that okay? Then instead of paying it into my wallet and then transfer it to you, so I'll pay the money. What I do is that I just ask that it should transfer it straight to you. You see,
is that tax avoidance or tax evasion?
It's evasion. Because the point is that you are not the owner of the number. We want as a country to be able to actually trace who has what. Is that okay? If we don't actually make conscious effort at working at some of these things, we are actually just starving ourselves in the back.
So my plan is to deal with tax and take questions on tax, and then I'll deal with. Does that make sense? So my last question on tax. So pardon me, gentlemen. When we were at Kempinski 2 weeks ago, the companies were sort of concerned about what they consider to be arbitrary tax audits, where GRA officials will just appear and say we are doing a tax audit, 5-year audit. Sometimes they do it 2-year audit, and invariably they will say you owe more money, and somehow you don't have anywhere to go about it. So I just want to know, is there a law backing the audit, or is there some logic behind it? Is there some timeline? How do you choose the companies? Because sometimes they feel it's arbitrary, and they use a word. I think they said they were being hounded. They use another word, predatory tax audits. You've heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
So please address.
Okay, thank you very much. For us in Ghana Revenue Authority, we administer taxes, as I said earlier. And one of the ways by which we can do that is to actually ensure that taxpayers comply with the tax laws and then the regulations. Now, to be able to do that, we need to actually conduct an audit. We need to conduct an audit. The audits, the taxpayers are selected based on some criteria randomly. And even in some cases, we have some intelligence. Is that okay? On that basis, we can actually follow up and conduct an audit. But you see, the point is that when an audit is conducted, you have the right, I get it, to, in fact, we engage you as the process goes on until it is done. We will have an exit conference with you, and then we'll tell you what we have found. Is that okay? Then if you have reasons to justify, then we'll listen to you. Is that okay? When Mr. Appiah was presented, he mentioned that when an audit is done, or a GRA is an assessment, we insist that pay 30% before you can be listened to, if even the assessment is wrong. Respectfully, I disagree. That is not actually what is done. And he knows it. What we do is that when an assessment is raised, and we go through the procedure, it is determined. Then it is now the Commissioner General who has the discretion, is that okay, to vary the 30%. Because the 30% is actually by law. So the law says the Commissioner General can vary it, can suspend it, and can waive it. But he has to do that, taking into account the need to raise revenue and to ensure the integrity of the tax system. He has to balance this too. Is that okay? That's what we do. I can say confidently, just yesterday, there was an issue like that in the office where a taxpayer came to Commissioner General and complained that an assessment that was done on him was fraught with errors. And he produced evidence. Quickly we called the office and asked that they should factor them in. You get it? So those things are done. But having said that, I must also admit that sometimes there are excesses. You get it? Yeah.
Okay. Bonus question for you. I was listening to the news recently and I heard an official say at the port that since you started insisting on, I think, import VAT or something, over 3,000 companies or 3,000 entities had sort of, number of people who were compliant had jumped by almost 3,000. I'm not sure I heard. So it was almost like the people at the port were complaining, but when you enforce the rule, you realize that there were so many companies that were engaged in importation who were not paying a certain tax. But by insisting in less than 3 months, over 3,000 companies. I don't know if I'm right. I heard it. Can you explain what that was?
Yeah, thank you very much. The import VAT that we have actually introduced is not a new tax. Okay. It is actually to ensure compliance. Mm-hmm. You see, we want to actually establish what we call parity in our pricing. And VAT is actually a consumption tax. You meet a threshold, then you are required to register. Now, when you don't register, Commissioner General has the right to compulsorily register you. What we have realized over time is that a lot of persons are doing business, but they are not paying taxes at all. So we said, okay, fine, let's institute this upfront, VAT. So immediately we did that. Then, if you import and then your value, that is your taxable value, whatever you have imported, is 200,000 and above, then you are not registered for VAT. We insist that VAT, you must actually register for VAT. But it doesn't mean that when you register for VAT and then you pay the upfront, that is all. If you are able to actually come to our office and then you register, then you take a refund for it. Again, if you also are able to demonstrate that the system actually captured you wrongly, then we would ensure that you are exempted. So it's not actually a new system.
So you are front-loading the compliance.
That is all about it.
And it's working.
It's working. It's working. So that again tells you that in Ghana, we have a culture of not.
Yeah. So I was bringing that to say that even though you are happy I'm punching him, we are all not that clean, right? Because if he front loads the compliance and gets 3,000 in what period? Was it 1 month or something?
Yeah. Since we started.
Yeah, 3 months. So it means that there were a lot of companies doing business that were not paying. So the Yao slide is actually true. Are we on the same level? Okay. I'm going to take a few questions for them, knowing that I have a second part of the panel. So let's be economic with the question. If you can help me, are there any questions for these two gentlemen in relation to taxes? Oh, nice. No question. Okay. Here's a lady at the back. I just want to see the hand so I can manage the time better. One. Who else has a question? Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. My name is Ivy, IDS Consulting. So I think I have a comment or a question, I think Mr. Boache. The first comment that you made, you said we need to widen the tax bracket. And I think what I didn't hear was the how, because I think there's so many taxes on the collection side. So what we do, we actually support small and medium-sized enterprises with accounting, bookkeeping, and advisory. So this is very practical for us. And a lot of the times, when we get our clients registered for VAT, so we are paying the output taxes, but we don't have input tax. So for me, I want to understand, and their input side is from the informal sector. So I want to understand what we are actually doing to also bring those into the bracket. So the burden is not always on us, because it's very frustrating. So that would be my question.
Thank you, Ivy.
I think that I did not meant that we should increase the number of taxes that we have. What I meant is that we should broaden the tax base to involve those people who are outside the tax bracket.
So I think I want to know who is the we.
So if you say we should broaden, is it talking about those of us in this room, the two of you?
All of us.
No. Okay. So you said we should broaden the taxes. For me, I'm speaking to you in the capacity of Ghana Revenue Authority.
Yeah.
So who is the we that should broaden the taxes? Is it Ghana Revenue Authority? Is it Parliament? Who is going after the Makola people to make sure that they're also issuing VAT invoices so we get input taxes when we are paying the output?
You see, we as Revenue Authority cannot just get up and say that, come and do this. It is per legislation. So when we say we, I'm referring to we as Ghanaians. We have to come together by our representatives in Parliament, by our representation in Parliament, to come up with a law that will broaden the base for the tax correction.
Just to add quickly, you see, you would agree with me that lately the Ghana Revenue Authority, as part of its reforms, has become so visible through radio, TV, and electricity. Why are we doing that? We are doing that because we want to ensure economic tax compliance. So, what is the tax net? We are also asking, in fact, urging you, persons who are not paying that you know, please talk to them. This country is the only country we have.
All right. Thank you. Are there any more? Yes, madam. Where's the mic?
No, but there's another issue she raised which we need to answer.
Yes,
about this
the input side.
output.
Yes.
You see, when it comes to VAT, it works on input-output, mechanism. But we have categories. We have retailers, we have wholesalers, and then service providers and manufacturers. Now, if you are a retailer, what the law says is that your input tax, you can't claim it. Is that okay? But the fact that you can't claim it does not mean that it is lost. You claim it through the direct tax by taking it as an allowable deduction. Is that okay? So when I hear people say that, retailers actually are denied the claim of input tax, that is not true. Because they claim it, but they claim it through the direct tax. It will reduce your taxable income. So I don't know, you end up paying, a little tax.
All right.
So
thank you. Second question, madam.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Please, I work with GIPC. I'm a procurement officer. My problem is that this widening of tax nets has been since I was in the secondary school, when they were saying, what are the advantages of increasing tax? Then they will say widening the tax nets. And up till now, we don't even know the ingredients that would make the widening of the tax net possible. So as we are here, I think you as a agency, implementing agency, should be able to come out with something, an idea, that, when we do this or that, so that when we as procurement officers going out, sending IFQ to other vendors, it will not deter them, because most of them, they don't even have it, so they won't come. So that is a very big problem for us. So if you could, as an implementing agency, do something about this, will help us a lot. Thank you.
This one, you're not. Just
I
want to take more.
Just a quick one. We are not only asking that the tax net should be widened, but it should also be deepened. There are persons who are not paying the requisite tax they are supposed to pay. So we are also asking for deepening, not only widening.
Deepening and widening. Joe.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much. On this issue of tax widening or broadening, so e-levy, I'm a salaried worker. I get paid 5,000 Ghana cedis. I pay my tax. I have a painter who is doing a job for me at home, and I have to pay him, an electrician. He's not in any, he has not been registered, but I want to be able to pay him how much, there were. So I'm paying 500 Ghana cedis. Now, if I transfer 500 Ghana cedis to him, I pay e-levy, right? Right, Chief?
Yeah. Yes.
But I have already paid tax on my 5,000 that I earned as a salaried worker. And I want to do convenience, like you rightly said. Now, in broadening the tax net, if you had used my Ghana card ID to withhold my e-levy that I was supposed to pay, because I'm a registered person, and I transfer the 500 Ghana cedis to my painter, and the painter is not registered, he can then bear the e-levy, and that will be broadening the tax net. But I'm a registered salaried worker. You know me. I've paid my payee, and then I'm going to pay e-levy again. So that is where your evasion comes in. Now, what I'll do is I'll walk to the bank, I'll cash the 500 Ghana cedis, and I'll just pay the guy his 500 cedis, and he moves on. And he is even bold to tell me, Masa, why? But if I know that I would not bear that e-levy because I've already paid the tax because of my Ghana card, I think you have more people subscribing to it, those of us who you already know from PE. So I think we should take a look at this. So as you are saying that ways to broaden the tax net, we have some of the solutions, except that it is still a double taxation to those of us that you already know.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
From what he's saying, if the Ghana card and his phone number are known to you, and he's a compliant taxpayer, are you able to know if he sends Momo that is the same person?
Oh, yes.
You're able to know?
Yeah, the system should be able to.
So is his suggestion workable?
Yeah, in fact, I think that's a very nice suggestion. But you see, with tax, occasionally policymakers, they review them. So I'm sure these comments, fortunately, our minister is, honorable minister is here. And then I've also seen the head of tax policy, who is also over there, he has heard. So in the course of the review, I'm sure we'll look at it.
So that's an incentive for those who are registered to be compliant. Then a benefit can come from there. Joe, thank you for that suggestion. Any more? Yes, sir.
Hello. Yeah, so Bernard, when you started, you read a tall list of taxes that was on a vehicle. Yesterday, on my school platform, a similar thing happened, and it was on just a moment. It was on payment of various levies, after which there's a VAT on those levies. And I think the presenter also made that clear. I just want to know whether that is a fair system of taxation, where you are taxing levies. We need to know. And for corporate entities like ours, that swells up our cost of operation, and it doesn't make business too friendly. So we want answers to that as well. Thank you very much.
Can you come in?
Okay, thank you very much. As I said earlier, taxation is governed by law. If you look at the VAT Act, Section 43, it says that the VAT should be the last tax to be imposed after all the taxes have been imposed. By interpretation, what it means is that, what it means is that the levies must first be imposed, and then you will now impose the VAT as the last tax on it. You see, if we as a country, we think that that is not the way to go, then we can have a conversation and have the law amended. But as it is now, GRA has no option but to implement the law. Thank you very much.
But you see, Mr. Nab, to be fair, your low, your 13%, some of that could be because of these things. I'm not saying that's all, because a tax on a levy is a bit strange.
No, it's not strange. It's in the law.
Okay, then the law is strange. All right, we'll take a couple more, and then we move to. Are we happy? Are we okay? The minister has to go, but he has to say something before he goes. Please give him a mic just to say something in terms of how we can work together to increase that 13% in a way that can be mutually beneficial. Honorable Minister, thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much indeed, and GRA, thanks for standing up to this inquisition. You are doing very well. No, I mean, Bernard, these are, in my mind, conversations that we as a nation should be having. So, for example, I live in this very leafy, nice Labone area. I do. And then I get my property taxes, and it's maybe 3,000 cedis. Okay? So I pay that. Is that really what I should be paying and the value of that? Then you look at, you know, my wonderful upper middle class people who rail about taxes, you know, in a very virulent way. And you ask them, so that real estate property that you are renting out, are you actually paying those taxes? And you know you are not. You know, so I hope that, you know, by the middle of next year, I should be able to click a button, look at your national ID card, be able to know that you bought 10 tickets to fly out, and I'll give you a sense of the taxes that you should pay. So this whole kind of self-righteousness about GRA being the bad guys, let's ask ourselves deeply that are we paying what we are supposed to be paying? And you'll be amazed about where this 13% is about. So as I mentioned, we did this thing, the EVAT, automation EVAT, where, you know, these great companies are essentially reporting, what, 320,000 CDs of sales a month. After putting through the EVAT system, it's 31 million CDs. Wow. And of course, we can meet in these rooms and they'll tell you how GRA is harassing them. And of course, he's admitted that there will be excesses. But truly, you know, when we also look at just enlightened self-interest and see this country as a safe green place, there has to be a way in which we partner in bringing some light into this whole system. And that's really important. E-levy, for example, when we talk about tax broadening and tax deepening, that becomes the issue, because with the way in which we have moved into the mobile industry, everybody is connected. And therefore, maybe there are some things that we should change about it, but it is one sure way in which you know that everybody is contributing. And then the other issue is also we talk about the informal market being very broad and et cetera, et cetera. And that's true. And so this tax identification by the Vice President is really important for us to do that. But really, when we talk about the informal market in terms of quantum also, it's really my professional friends who have the legal firms and have the doctors, whatever. They don't even have accountants in their offices. And it's cash, and they move on, and they will be the ones also pontificating about, you know, issues. So this is a very important national conversation. And the transition is usually very difficult and uncomfortable, you know, but really it is the way that we have to go. Because, and I started with the issue of, you know, how do you create a country that is peaceful? And that has to do with economic freedom and social mobility. So I don't think I have any choice but to ensure that people get educated and people have health. Now, in between there, how do I get the resources not to compromise so that the human quality is not, you know, is not challenged or we don't build up? And that's important. So we forget about COVID, for example, where maybe 260,000 100,000 people died in Africa, maybe 7 or 8 million global, and we had, what, 1,462. Also, we did not miss the year for our kids because they were able to go to school and therefore continue the system. That is all kind of not even bothered to be thought of. But those are what creates this green space and a sense of progress that's important. And do we have to then sacrifice to pay for? Yes, we might have to. We have to be more responsive as a government to understand the issues, but truly as you look at government, and then you also realize that without a strong private sector, it's not possible. But citizens' responsibility is also key. It's sometimes really embarrassing when you speak to, let's say, maybe high-placed Ghanaians in multinational firms, and you are asking very poignant questions about, well, I mean, this thing, isn't it taking money out of the country? And, you know, it's a challenge. But I think it's too beautiful a country for us to play chaskele with, you know. And so the conversations are helpful, the partnership, and I'm extremely hopeful, you know, about what we have done in this very difficult time and what we need to do going forward. So we'll be with you in partnership.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Put your hands together for Finance Minister. You know, what I like about this minister, he will say very difficult things with a smile. He won't even shout. It was very powerful. Let's come to PURC. So the PPP conversation is also very critical. So this is public-private sector partnership. It seems as if the PURC would know of examples of success stories in the PPP space. So please share some with us, and then we would see. So I'm starting with Alaji, then I'll come to here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think somewhere in the early part of 90s, Ghana had some power crisis. So I'll start with the energy bit, then I'll get to the water end. When it had it, there was this committee that was put in place to come with the power sector reforms. And that ended up having the PURC having to be formed somewhere in 1997, and the Energy Commission as well. It came with some sort of recommendations. And the recommendations were to get the private sector to partner, the government to get stable power, at least reliable power, to promote industrialization within the country. So what happened was that they came up with the PURC that had as part of its functions to protect the interests of consumer and the investor, as well as the service provider. So it started with what we call the unbundling, which other African countries are still struggling to do. But Ghana, we have a very clear-cut system where we have the generator being different from the transmission company and the distribution company. And even more recently, we are talking about retail market that is going to get the private sector to be part of the service industry. So that what happened was that Ghana chose the part of tackling the deficit. And the deficit was to have enough generation because we had shortage. So we had the private sector coming in. And I can tell you that now we have over 13 private power producers. And without them, I think Ghana cannot have adequate supply. That is the story as we have it now. And that is very reliable and those. So because of the unbundling, the private people could fit into the generation space. And now we have private people being same as the public.
Quick follow-up there. Are the IPPs happy? Because I know that there's been issues around monies owed them and payments. So if this arrangement is to be sustainable, it must make financial sense for them. So is the PURC able to talk about how you've helped to manage that whole process where IPPs come on and say, we are owed 3 billion cedis, and if the money doesn't come, the lights will go off, and we don't want to be part of the debt exchange because that's not the bargain we give our investors and all of that. What is your comment on that?
Yes. Honestly, if you look at what is happening within the IPP front, fortunately on the part of the IPPs, not on the part of the Ghanaian consumer, most of the contracts which are bilateral are signed in USD. So if you owe them, the debt is quoted in dollars, but the date of payment is always in cedis. So that is why you have the legacy debt always increasing, where ECG will tell you that there is this much debt that we have to get more money to pay, because their debt in their books, they are taking their money in USD. So any delay in payment or liquidity challenge affects how much cedis they will need to get the equivalent of dollars. And that is why you always see when the exchange rate, there is that parity or increase in depreciation with the cedi against the dollar, PURs will have to adjust tariffs to match up, because ECG will need equivalent of cedis to be able to pay the IPPs. So when it comes to the generation sector, there is nothing that the commission can do, because these are bilateral contracts. So what you just need to do is to get the actuals of the previous 3 months, and you make projections ahead, and you convert it into cedis for the ratepayers to do. And that is the system that we have. So there is always enough provision, even if there is some slight gap. It's always clawback anytime there's going to be an adjustment, because that outstanding has to be paid for. And in generation, you can't touch it because they are bilateral contracts that were done. So when consumers always mention that PURs rates are high, we forget that some of the agreements are bilateral agreements, which as a commission we have nothing that we can do about it. If you look at even the current end user tariff, over 70% is into generation. ECG, GRICO, NEDCO get less than 30% of the amount we have to pay. That tells you the private sector is not driving the price escalation, because the generation is driving the price escalation, because majority of VRA contribution is the legacy hydro, which Ghanaians have paid for. So it's relatively free, which doesn't, which we normally even use to mitigate the cost escalation. So that is the framework that we have. So if you look at the PPP, it has helped in Ghana, especially with the generation side. GRICO, everywhere across the globe, transmission is considered as a national security issue, because your country can be thrown out if you allow a lot of people to play with your transmission network. But in distribution, we have private players who are getting it. And very soon, ECG are having discussions of getting people into the retail market, where private people can go in, because we think that is the only way to introduce efficiency into that.
Last question for you, again, sensing the room. In the past, we hear that in Ghana, you charge people who consume power at home cheaper than those who use it productively. So a lot of the Club 100 people are using power to do things which are more useful. TV, right? How is your, I understand there's been some change there. How that tariff, has it been fully rectified, or it's sort of a process?
Yeah, it's a process, because it was something that came from the inception, and now I think the cost of service that residential users are bearing has reduced. In the past, industries were taking, some of them were taking as much as 150% of cost, so they were paying more, 50% more, and the idea was that they will cost it and as part of the product, and people will indirectly pay. But this is now what the commission is doing deliberately. So if you look at the last quarter adjustment we did, the non-residential and the industries had 0 increment. So the revenue gap was to be borne by the residential users. So it's now a deliberate policy that the commission has put in place to reverse it, so that people will be paying for their cost of service. But we can't just do it once. We are doing it gradually. But we are thinking that within no time, we should be able to flip it so that everybody will pay for their cost of service. But what I must put is that there are 2 markets, and some of the customers are within the deregulated market, and that are bilateral. So anytime cost of electricity come out, they push it on PURC, which only handles the regulated market. The deregulated market will only look at the quality of service, but most of them are bilateral in terms of that. So the big companies, you might not see them falling in under the ambit of PURs. We'll just be looking at the quality of service. And the contract, in some situations, factor in efficiency that you will have. It's not only about the pricing. I can tell you that I want efficiency of, let's say, about reliability of 99%. And that is for the generator to make sure that you always get 99% reliability alongside the price and bid. Thank you.
Please give him a hand. Give him a hand. Wonderful. Last panel member, thank you, Mr. Fuku. When Yao did his presentation, you were not here, but he did a slide where he, and by the way, Yao is from Deloitte. He did a presentation where at some point he asked companies their biggest challenges. And if you look at the order, inflation was number 1 in terms of the frequency of occurrence of that answer. Currency fluctuation was number 2. And then cost of capital was number 3. Am I correct? Yes. There were other things. Now, I think inflation is within your remit. Currency fluctuation is within your remit. And I can even say cost of capital, cost of funds, in a sense, within your remit, right? So what do you have to say to these companies here when they say that the macro environment, in particular, inflation, currency depreciation and fluctuation and cost of capital, what's your comments to them in relation to your mandate of managing monetary policy?
Thank you, Ben. I think that their concern is legitimate, but when it comes to inflation, there is an aspect that can easily be managed by the central bank. There's the administrative bit where you have PRC increasing utility prices. Those ones will naturally feed into. So there's an aspect of inflation that the central bank can handle. Then there's an aspect that the central. So it would be very difficult to say that you can have one particular handle on inflation. Where you can handle, what we can do is to deploy the instruments that we have. And that, in our case, we have the Bank of Ghana bills. We have our dealings with the banks on overnight basis. So once we are able to gauge the level of liquidity, we know how to deploy the tools to extract these excess liquidity from the market. So where we can control, we deploy our tools to deal with. But there is an aspect that is coming from the external source.
So you're saying if it's a demand side issue, you can do that. But if it's supply side or external shocks, it's not within your remit.
It's not within our remit. Because Ghana is a small open economy. We are exposed to so many external shocks. And these shocks cannot be handled because you are only a partaker of a bigger environment. So for us, what we can do is to relate to the bank. We know what is happening in their books per their interaction with us. So once we deal with them on overnight basis, as well as on our usual using our bulk bills to extract, we do that. So fighting inflation is not just about prices
so can we
going
say
up.
that the recent inflation in the past 18 months, maybe from July last year to now, has been more of the other side than, because you've been raising your rates, you've been doing a lot of things in your MPC announcements, but somehow, even now, inflation is still in the 40s, low 40s. So it's not really that low. Your inflation target is 8 plus or minus. So you are far higher. So are we saying that this recent inflation is more supply side external than demand side?
Ben, it's a combination of things. Let's admit, monetary financing has been part of the challenge we've had. So naturally, when you step in there, liquidity outside there would influence the level of prices. But yes, it's a mixture. The external shock, the supply side, has really influenced the level of price. And if you look around, most central banks are with the positioning of their policy rate against inflation. Most central banks have negative real returns. So it's not so peculiar in the Ghanaian context. But then as far as the central bank is concerned, where we have managed to handle is to be able to have this moral suasion interaction with the bank, where we try to, talk to them as to how they go about their. So I would emphasize more on the supply side.
Deal with the currency fluctuation and then the cost of capital.
Currency fluctuation, and naturally, again, it's a supply side issue. Ghana takes more from the rest of the world in terms of import than we export. So naturally, our reserve position is a disadvantage. So in recent years, we've had Eurobond as part of our reserve management. We were by de facto taken out of the international capital market. And so that resource wasn't there to support. And in recent management is managed to do with gold companies where we get their dollars to support the reserve as well. So when it comes to the price side, I would also add that because we are disadvantaged regarding getting a lot of resources from outside, the little reserves you have through your own interaction with the banks and what I just mentioned about us taking a little bit from the cocoa gold, the mineral companies, is augmenting. So price fluctuation on the external side is also a supply side.
Quick question. Do you know GEPA is here. GEPA have been helping to improve our exports so we can make more money from there. In some countries, we see their central banks directly involved in import substitution. So for example, in Nigeria, they have the Anchor Lenders program where the central bank is directly encouraging banks to on-lend to people to produce more rice so they can import less rice because they know that it affects their exchange rate position. Does our law and our convention allow our central bank to be that proactive in the way it encourages the banks, its supervisors to lend so that our reserve position will be improved?
We had some conversations some years ago where we set up this subsidiary. Currently it's with Ministry of Finance, where we're supposed to help with agric financing. And it was a whole chain, the value chain, the insurance bit of it, the finance bit of it, but it's not been able to be pushed as expected. So I think that conversation can still go on. The central bank currently, we are not into the real sector financing. There are some conversation going around saying, why can't the central bank get in there? In quotes, I mean, this is informal. People are saying, why can't you print money to support real sector activity? But we don't have the mandate now, and in our laws, it's not allowed. So currently, we are not into the real sector.
Final question, cost of capital. And I'm using the background. This week, it was announced that your T-bill auction had been oversubscribed. And I wasn't sure that it's good news or bad news. So essentially, you are borrowing from people. And just
Bernard, let me correct that. That T-bill auction is a government of Ghana auction. Bank of Ghana is only a participant in that auction.
Thank you.
I get very uncomfortable when I hear newscasters saying it's a Bank of Ghana.
Okay.
We are members of the auction committee.
Okay. So but it's not you the one doing it. Thank you for that correction. Be that as it may, if you have an oversubscription of T-bills, does that not funnel the whole crowding out issue? Because if somebody can lend money to government, why would they lend it to Yao to do his farm in Kumeu? They're not going to give him the farm, right? So the point is that he will have more difficulty raising money because the government is looking for money to do a road, which is not a bad thing. So point about cost of capital is, does the BOD have any role to play there in terms of, because most banks will tell you that our cost of funds is high, which is why it's difficult to lend at interest rates that are below 10%.
Bernard, the challenge we have as a country is that the cost of borrowing is happening because, let me use myself as an example. When I go to a bank and I want a loan, the bank will want to locate where I live. The bank would want to ascertain my credit record. If the bank doesn't have my credit record, the bank naturally profiles me as a risky customer. So the problem we have as a people is that when you go for a loan, the bank will give you a paper to scribble your address and even the direction to your home. And so we don't have enough information. We thought the Credit Reference Bureau was supposed to help resolve part of that issue, where every lender would go into a certain database, ship out and see a triple A customer, and then give credit at a lower cost. But I don't think the environment for a bank, if I know Ben, and I know Ben is credit worthy, why can't I give Ben loan or credit at a lower cost? So it is how currently we have high NPLs. I don't have the numbers offered, but these banks are struggling with recovery. NPLs are going up because there are challenges with recovery. So the issue about the cost of credit has to do with the risky nature in giving us. So naturally, everybody would want to lend to government.
But now you are doing national ID, you have digital address, you have GRA, everything is integrated. Digitalization is working, so you know where I am, unless you're saying that it's just on paper. If digitalization is working, the riskiness, the anonymity of customers should be reduced.
Ben, you should be talking to the banks. It is risky. They prefer salary workers because it is visible. He has a salary to take money from. So it's difficult giving out credit because the ability to pay back is the challenge. So for us, the cost has to do more with how the banks view a customer.
All right. Do you have any questions? I'm done. I'm happy. So if you don't have any questions, we can close and go home. We have we have a very important presentation before we go, though. Can you give him the mic? Any more questions? Okay.
Thank you so much. Mine is not a question, but a contribution to the private-public partnership arrangement. So I'm a petroleum geologist, so I want to talk about the energy sector, especially the upstream industry. Since 2018, when we had our first bidding round, no PA has been signed up to now. And then we have companies like us who are service companies, who have JVs, so our partners have invested in the country. And then for the past 5 years, no contract. When you look at the Petroleum Commission list of registered companies, we are about 500. And then we are all chasing contracts from only 2 operators in the country. So this, my suggestion is that maybe the GIPC, the Petroleum Commission, the GMPC, the Ministry of Finance can come together and look for local companies here who can invest into an oil block, preferably shallow water, because deep water is very expensive. So they can give them shallow water block with GMPC as the lead into the exploration. So if we have about 2 more to add to the 2 that we have, then we have about 4 operating in the country. Then service companies, because when you look at the list at the PC, it's very tall. And all of us are chasing contracts from only 2 operators. And then some of our partners are getting further because they have registered, they have invested their money in the country, and the industry, yes, we know the external factors that has hit the industry. But as a country, we can look into that. That's my suggestion.
I think it's a wonderful suggestion. You, if you will react to that suggestion before we go. Any more questions? No question. You, if you can react to that, and then the MC, you take over.
Yes, I think it's a pretty good suggestion, but I can also give you a leeway into what is happening on the petroleum front. I know that government has, in quotes, sequestered the onshore reserves that we have, which, by the way, occupy 40% of our land mass for indigenous people or investors. So you have an opportunity there that, as a Ghanaian, you could probably go and investigate, and you could actually apply for an oil block on the onshore, which would cost you much, much less than if it was offshore. So that, I believe that government is already considering that. And it's interesting you should say that, because I often get comments like, but you are giving all the investments to foreigners. I don't have any investments to give. I don't. It's people rather see opportunities and come and assess them and work on them, and we assist them. So I think that there's every investment opportunity available to every Ghanaian who really wants to invest in any area. Our key problem is the capital to do it. It's the capital to do it. But otherwise, the investments are there for all of us.
Thank you.
And that's why partnerships are important.
Wonderful. Which is why a big thank you to the panel. I've been speaking to Mr. Ernest Apiaboache, GRA Customs. Thank you. Mr. Dominic Nab, who's the DTRT Assistant Commissioner. Alhaji Abubakari from the RC, and Mr. Kweku Foko from the BOG. Thank you. I will hand over back to MC.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And I want to move quickly and get a presentation from KPMG on the Ghana Club 100 ranking criteria. Before they come, we want to acknowledge the presence of Madam Nora Banaman, who is a board member of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. You're welcome, Madam. So I want to invite Mr. Evans Asari, who's an associate director at KPMG, to give us this presentation. Thank you.
It's almost afternoon. Good afternoon. I'll stand on existing protocols to do this. Please, could you put up the slides for me? Okay. So this is the 20th edition of the GC 100. And we want to present to you two things. The first one is the eligibility criteria. How you qualify to be ranked. And the second is how we do the ranking. So please note the difference. First, how do you assess whether you are eligible to apply? And the second is how we do the ranking in-house. So to the eligibility, please, think like slide 4. Okay, so the first is the entity must be a limited liability company. Okay, it must be a limited liability company, so no sole proprietorship, no partnership. So it's an entity that has good corporate governance practices. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is that it must be an entity, if government has any holding or shares in it, should be less than 50%, unless the entity is listed on the stock market. Then the last one is that we've done a little tweak from last year's eligibility. Last year, we're looking at having a cumulative operating profit for the last 3 years. We know what has happened with DDEP and all that, and the impact on banks' profitability and other institutions. So this year, we are saying that we are looking at your net asset. You must have a positive equity. So your shareholders' fund should be positive for you to be able to apply. So if you have a cumulative, if you add all your net assets for the last 3 years, 2020, 21, 22, if you add them and they are positive and you qualify for the first two, okay, then you are eligible to apply to be ranked. What do we need? So the form will be circulated, I think, by GIPC, so this will be online. I think they will also accept application from the office. So what we need are 3 years of audited financial statements. Please, 3 years of audited, 2020, 21, 22. Okay, soft copies should be forwarded to the email that will be. So once the advert comes, it will come with a link as to where you can go and apply. Then the second one is your tax clearance certificate, the most recent. Today is digital, so you can easily apply for it online for you to generate your tax clearance certificate. So these are the documents we need for our work. If you have all these and then you qualify, you can apply. What are we using to do the ranking? We're looking at 4 parameters. The first one is size of the entity. The second is profitability. Third is growth. And the final one is impact. Let me quickly explain these 4 parameters. The first one, size, is absolute number. So we're looking at the size of the entity based on two things. First is your net asset value, or your net asset, or your shareholders' funds, or your equity. So that is the first one we are using to measure the size of the entity. And then your turnover or your revenue for the year. So you will look at cumulatively. We don't want to look at just 1 year where there could be some distortions, and a lot of things happened prior to the performance in 2022. So to just look at just 1 year would not be a fair way to assess the performance of a business. So we look at 3 years cumulative size, and then we'll find the average of the 3 years of your net assets, and then the average of your revenue over the last 3 years up to 22. That's why we're asking for your audited for the last 3 years. That parameter has 30% weighting. So whichever entity that has the highest of these would get all the 30%. Then we'll prorate for the rest of the entities that are applying. The second is profitability. This year we've looked at two parameters under profitability: return on equity and then return on assets. If we're going to look at return on equity, a lot of the economic things that have happened would really have an impact on some entities. So we are saying that, okay, why don't we split it? So for 20%, 10% is for ROE and 10% is for ROA, so that it becomes a fair basis to assess entities' usage of its shareholders' funds and assets. The third one is growth. If an entity has to be ranked as part of the first 100, it must demonstrate over the last 3 years that it has achieved some consistent growth. We are looking at 3 things. So we'll look at your net assets under growth, we'll look at your turnover under growth, and then we'll look at assets under growth. So that has 30%. I'll go to the details shortly. And then the final one, which is quite interesting, is impact. How have you made an impact? Under impact, we are looking at 4 things: CSR, corporate social responsibility. In the future, I'll be looking at ESG, because that is becoming a big issue. So we'll be looking at environmental, social, and governance practices in the future, but we'll look at how we can measure that. But this year's ranking, we are looking at your corporate social responsibility. We'll measure this as your spend on CSR as a percentage of your revenue. And then we'll look at your tax paid, because if you are collecting tax clearance certificates, you must be tax compliant and you must be paying your taxes. So we'll look at your cash flow statement, how much you paid as tax, and then we express it as a percentage of your profit before tax to see how. So these are all relative measures. The only one we are using absolute measure is size, just the number. But all the rest is relative. So profitability is your profit as a percentage of your equity, or profit as a percentage of your assets. So an entity's size really will not give it any competitive advantage or relative advantage, because we are expressing it as a percentage. So it could be a big entity, but your return on equity or asset could be less than an entity that is quite relatively small. The impact, as I was explaining, we look at employment, how much you are investing in your people. So what is the spend on employee as a percentage of your revenue? So we'll calculate all that for the last 3 years. And the final one is reinvestment. How much of your retained earnings or your cash you've retained in the business you are investing in the business, i.e. through either investment in CAPEX, capital assets, or if it is a bank, it has moved some reserves into shareholders' funds. So it is not something that is available for distribution to shareholders, but it is going back into the business for operational purposes. So these are the 4 parameters we'll be looking at this year. Please, the last slide. So these are the percentages. So if you look at size, which has 30%, if you look at your net asset, we are weighting it 15%. Then revenue is 15%. Then we look at growth. So growth, we have 3 different measures. The first one is net asset, revenue, and then total asset. They are all weighted equally, 10%. Then profitability, what is your return on assets, your return on equity? That is also weighted equally, 10-10. And then we come to the impact. So the impact, as I mentioned, is the sustainability part. That is the CSR. You are investing in some environmentally friendly projects or into some social projects. It's 5%. your tax paid as a percentage of your PBT is 5%, then employment, we are looking at your spend as a percentage of revenue, 5%, and then your reinvestment, which is expenditure that you've made in CAPEX, less any assets you've sold as a percentage of total assets. So this is also a relative measure, and then that is also 5%. So the sum should give us 100%. So any entity that performs, normally we have some entities that are performing better in certain parameters and not performing so well, but on the aggregate, once we put it all together, it will show us which entity really is the number one in terms of the Club 100. So these are the various measures and parameters we'll be using for the ranking. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you very much, KPMG, for that brief presentation. We are left with our last activity, and we'll leave here. We want to invite Mr. Charles Opoku-Mensah to give us a short presentation on the Ghana Investment Trade Week and the Ghana Club 100. Mr. Opoku-Mensah, please.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you. Just a brief presentation on what to expect for this year's Club 100 Awards. This year's own is the 20th edition, and for that reason, we have a week-long celebration, and we've termed it the Ghana Investment and Trade Week. It will start from 23rd of October to the 27th of October. The 23rd, it opens with a golf tournament, and then we move into the summit and the exhibition. And then on the 26th, we do industrial tours, cultural and industrial tours, and then we crown it with the Ghana Club 100 Awards on the 27th of October. We've partnered with a global trade and investment events group called the MIA Group, and so they are going to bring in a lot of foreign participation from the Caribbean, Europe, Gulf, and Asia. So we'll have a lot of foreign participants coming through. And so we are entreating all Club 100 members and also good affiliates of GIPC to support this worthy cause. So we'll be knocking your doors to seek some good partnerships and sponsorships. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles, for your presentation. We want to state that the consultants, KPMG, are here in our midst. So if any of the companies has any question concerning the presentation that was made, the methodology and all of that, you are free to meet Mr. Sari and his team. They are here, they'll engage you, and then we'll be able to make things clear for us to have a very successful event. We thank you very much. We want to invite Seriam to give us the vote of thanks for this morning and also the closing prayer.
It's afternoon now, and we are very grateful that you have all stayed with us from morning, especially those who came in very early trying to beat the morning traffic. We have taken all of your morning. We are very grateful to our speakers. Mr. Yawalate, we are very, very grateful for your very insightful presentation. To our panelists, two from GRA, from Bank of Ghana, and from PURC Alaji. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you all very much. Our guests from ECG, SNET, all of you, Ghana Club 100 members, we cherish you. We have the opportunity for interactions and for networking, and we're hoping that these discussions will help us actually find some answers to some of the challenges that our businesses are having as we prepare towards the Ghana Club 100 Awards in October. Thank you very much for coming, and on behalf of the CEO, Mr. Yofi Grant, we are very grateful, and we look forward to further engaging you in other such helpful sessions. Thank you very much. Shall we pray? Father God, we thank you for your presence. We called on you from the beginning, and we thank you that we have had a good session. We pray for our leaders. We pray for wisdom. We pray for direction. We pray for your grace, for our private sector, that there will be growth, that you who even makes water flow in the deserts will turn things around, especially for businesses that are struggling, that your grace and mercy will be abundant. We thank you for your presence as we live here. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for coming. My name is Kwame Kesejepon. I've been your MC, and we are grateful to you for your time. Thank you.
Ghana has officially become the commercial and trade hub of Africa, providing investors an enabling business environment backed by strong economic fundamentals, dynamic policies, and political stability. The overall friendly nation is a land of opportunity, full of optimism and open for business. And we invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Full of optimism and open for business. And we invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Ghana has officially become the commercial and trade hub of Africa, providing investors an enabling business environment backed by strong economic fundamentals, dynamic policies, and political stability. The overall friendly nation is a land of opportunity, full of optimism and open for business. And we invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Strong economic fundamentals, dynamic policies, and political stability. The overall about 57% of Ghana's total land area. Optimism and open for business. And we invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. About 57% of Ghana's total land area is classified as agricultural land area, laying grounds for viable micro and business ventures. With the diversity in commodities being produced to feed factories, a vibrant labor force, a ready market, coupled with incentivizing government policies, there is no doubt that the sector has become an exciting preserve to create wealth and foster national development. We invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Ghana is experiencing a digital revolution. It has been ranked #1 in Africa as the country with the fastest internet broadband speed per the Speedtex Global Index, indicative of the national development. We invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Exciting prospects in the sector. The government regards the ICT industry as a key engine of economic development, and it is committed to maximizing its potential through provision of ICT infrastructure and incubator programs to support startups. We invite you to come, grow in Ghana, and grow with Ghana. Ghana is set to become the industrial hub for a sub-region, following a raft of policies being put in place by the government to reform the manufacturing sector. The establishment of special economic zones and sector industrial parks with several incentives has bolstered growth of Ghana's manufacturing sector, leading to an increase in export of manufactured goods. We invite you to come, grow in Ghana and grow with Ghana. As a fast-growing oil and gas producer, Ghana's petroleum industry offers investment prospects ranging from exploration and discovery to refining and marketing. The opportunities abound with a spike in demand for oil and gas service firms that can partner with indigenous Ghanaian companies to support the offshore activities of the international oil companies. We invite you to come, grow in Ghana and grow with Ghana.